that's what I'm doing. Like I'm chasing success because I can control it. I can't control my life. But now I'm a 30 something. I can 1000% control my life. And so I just had to kind of unpack the root cause of why I was doing those things and realize like, oh, well, I've already arrived. I've done all the things. Now I don't need to do them no more. And so I can gift myself rest or the ability to say no. So doing that inner work is important and you really can't avoid it to get on the other side of wherever because it's always going to come up.
Welcome to Behind the Work, the show where we dive deep into the business, life, and careers of people doing some amazing things in the world. I'm your host, Jessica Santana, and I'm bringing you the stories behind the sexy and unsexy parts of success. So whether you're working at a company, building your business, or you're just trying to level up, this is for you. At Behind the Work, we believe that we all have to go up together, so make sure you're tapped in. All right, everyone. I'm so excited because today we have the great pleasure of talking to one of my favorite people, Dr. Khalia Braswell. So, Dr. Braswell is an award-winning technologist, researcher, and speaker featured in Forbes, NBC, PBS, Essence, and more. With more than 14 years of experience, she specializes in user research for mobile and web applications, aligning business and user needs. She's worked at major brands such as Chic-Fil-A, Apple, and Bank of America. And in 2014, Dr. Braswell founded an organization called INTech Camp for Girls, a nonprofit that was dedicated to creating opportunities for girls of color in tech. And she raised over $500,000 for the organization during her tenure. After leaving the organization in 2022, she pursued and graduated from Temple University with a Ph.D. in education and a concentration in STEM. A TEDx speaker and a 2024 Ebony Power 100 honoree, Dr. Braswell has graced numerous stages to drive social change through technology and user research. So, my girl Khalia, welcome to the show.
I sound legit.
You sound legit. Y'all, my friends is legit. No, but you know what?
No,
So
thank
with
you.
everyone that has come on the show, I've provided like some insight into how I even got to know them. And so,
Mm,
Kalia, obviously, the listeners don't know, but we met through the 4.0 schools program.
yes.
Kalia had just applied to the program. I was her coach through the program, and we've just stayed in touch ever since. Kalia at some point made the decision to just grow her organization, grow her brand. And I think what has been really phenomenal about, seeing your journey is that I call you the queen of the pivot, right? Like the queen of the pivot. I think that you pivoted, but you also have pivoted in such an intentional way each and every time because
Mm,
you were just like, this is not working no more. I gotta pivot. And for some people, they stay stuck, right? And so much of
mm.
the conversation today is going to be about that. And I'm really excited because I am really excited to just see how the listeners respond to your story. And so that's that. I don't know if you want to provide some context on how we got to know each other, but that's how I remember it.
That's exactly how it happened. However, I will say that your coaching was very pivotal in my mindset shift for the growth that eventually came from Intech because when Jess was my coach, I was living on the West Coast, living my best life at Apple and in Cali. I really miss it out there. But Jess was like, "So how are you going to run a North Carolina nonprofit in California?" And I'm like, I'm like, just make it work. Like, but I really sat with that and eventually quit the job at Apple and moved back to North Carolina. And that's when we kind of like really took off. So shout out to Jess for her wonderful coaching and just being real with me so that I could get through the fog of my own little idea of what I thought I could do.
No, of course. I always say, I mean, I could have coached you and you could have not done anything, And so that work was all on you, girl. And so, but speaking of North Carolina, right? Like we got to start with the origin story because so much of the ways in which you've grown professionally have been informed by your childhood experiences and
Yeah.
the things that you saw growing up. And I think it's important that people know that you don't just get to places, right? Like there are certain things that happen in your formative years that get you to these places. And so I want you to tell the audience, like, who was little Khalia? Where did she grow up? What were her dreams, her aspirations, and maybe how those experiences led her into tech first?
Okay, so it's actually funny because I actually sometimes I'm really close still with my high school mentors, and every now and again I'll see like a Facebook memory pop up, and I'll ask them like, "How did y'all put up with me in high school?" Because I was a lot. But before we get there, little Kalia, I was born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, which is eastern North Carolina. Um, it's rural, but it's a little bit more of a city than your typical eastern North Carolina cities because it's right off of I-85. Um, and my mother moved to Charlotte when I was in the first grade to kind of get herself situated. And so I stayed with my grandparents. And then in second grade, I moved to Charlotte and I hated it because all of my community and my family was in Rocky Mount. But the reason why my mom did that was because she wanted more opportunities for me. And she didn't feel that I could do that in Rocky Mount. And so if you talk about little Kalia, like I was on the newspaper for the accelerator reader. I don't know if I like read the most books or whatever, but always an avid reader. Then I get to Charlotte. My mom actually just told me at my PhD graduation party that I was put out of a school allegedly because I was too advanced. I was talking too much. I was finishing my work. I was in the academically gifted program, but they would only pull me out of class like a few times a week or a month. I don't even know. And so allegedly, because I'm just finding this out, they called my mom to the school and said, "Hey, you got to figure something else out because she's outpacing the students and distracting them." And so for elementary, we kind of hopped around. I went to a different school for fourth grade, and then in fifth grade, we found the school that only had like academically gifted, talent development, whatever level students. And then I had to catch up with them because they were ahead of me. And then sixth, seventh, eighth grade, middle school is where I learned how like the basics. The 90s kids, we learned how to type. We took typing classes. We did the digital literacy, the Word, the Excel. And I was just really into it. And I think I got my first computer in the fourth grade. And so by the time I got to middle school, there was a colleague of mine, Dr. Siobhan Day at NC Central. On a podcast, she mentioned that the computer was her best friend. And I like to say that too, because I'm my mom's only child. And so while I have siblings on my dad's side, I didn't grow up in the house with them. So it was very much me just on a computer. And then in high school, I enrolled at Philip O'Berry Academy of Technology. And that's where my love of technology really was not only fostered, but it was deepened because that's where I learned how to code. So I learned Java. And I was like, oh, I can make things like, I'm coding on the back side, designing them on the front side, and then showing it to someone and they're using it. Like, that was kind of mind blowing. But around that time also there's MySpace, right? And so I'm like doing all this kind of stuff with HTML, thinking I'm doing something like I'm really coding. Well, it felt like it at the time. I was legit we were coding on MySpace, and just being creative with it. And so I just followed that path. And so I had a lot of opportunities that I now realize were privileged opportunities in high school. That's when I got my first technical internship. So back in the day, there was a bank called Wachovia, which is now Wells Fargo. Their headquarters was in Charlotte. I had an internship there the summer before my senior year, and then they allowed me to come back my second semester of my high school, my senior year through college. And so I already had experience. I had a lot of women teaching me computer science. My AP computer science teacher was a Black woman who went to Norfolk State. The IT lady that led IT at my school was a Black woman. So I had all of this like representation. I was a part of BDPA, the Black Data Processing Associates. So I was doing hackathons before hackathons were hackathons. Like, I was a nerd, y'all, but I was cool. I played sports and stuff. Um, and I was into music, but yeah, they really fostered me. And when I say I asked my mentors from high school, like, how did y'all put up with me? They really propped me up. Like, they gave me, I had a big ego. And rightfully so. I got a little humbled in college though. And so you ask about dreams and aspirations. I don't even know what they were. I just wanted to be successful. I knew I didn't come from, I came from a lot in terms of like culture, but I don't come from a lot of money. I'm the most educated in my family, first generation, like all those labels. And so for me, I just wanted to be successful, whatever that was. And it wasn't until my adult life that I realized the unhealthy attachment that I had with that. But we can get into that later. Because even in, all the things I just told you about what I did in high school, I didn't even know that to major in computer science. Like now it's a no brainer, but no one ever said that's what you should do based on what you did in high school. I wanted to major in entrepreneurship. And one of my big sisters, she was my mentor then through the TRIO program. She was like, "You're not majoring in entrepreneurship, Khalia." And I was like, "Why not? I want to be an entrepreneur." Like it just made sense. And then at some point, I actually majored in computer engineering first. We can get into that later. But anyway, my point is that like I was really into tech, but I never really had dreams and aspirations around like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I've just been going with the flow since like my whole life. It's kind of my personality, but that's the picture that I'll paint for now.
So, one of the things that I have always really loved about your story is that it reminds me so much of mine. I got my first computer in the fifth grade. I grew up with siblings, but they were much, much older than me. And so me and my computer, like we were A1 since day one. Also, my mom and dad really didn't like me being outside. So it was really just like
Those
me.
Brooklyn streets.
They didn't want me in these Brooklyn streets. And so I feel like my affinity towards technology really became a thing as a result of the community that I was growing up in. And I think that similar to you, when I was in high school, no one really told me that I could major in computer science. I didn't get into tech formally until after my graduate school education, which is when I found out, like, oh, okay, like there is the tech world and all these things that I'm doing on the side, and I'm calling them side projects. They are not just side
Mm,
projects, like I can make a career out of them. And so that resonates
wow.
with me so much, right? And so, one thing I want to ask you is just around, your high school, because, I think that high schools play an instrumental role in shaping a young person's interest and
Yep.
how they go about making decisions about careers and college and things like that. And you speak really highly of your, high school. And I also just know that they also didn't tell you can go into tech, right? So what do you think were the things that made the school really dope? And what do you think, you wish for future generations in the school to have that maybe would have expedited your journey into tech a little bit faster?
Yeah. I go hard for my alma mater, I won't lie, but I actually stayed on that side of town, so I saw the school being built. And so we didn't even know what the school was going to offer, but I saw technology and I was like, yo, I have to go to that high school. Um, so they're part of NAF. I don't know if you're familiar with NAF. It no longer is an acronym. It's just NAF,
Oh,
but
National
they
Academy.
do, yeah, foundation. Yeah, that's what they used to be. Yep. And so we had the IT. We had three academies at my school, and the IT academy was a NAF academy, and so they were using NAF curriculum. Um, and I think it was actually set up really well because I took a Foundations of Information Technology course my freshman year. So I learned about computer networking, computer programming, and then Adobe Flash, dating myself. And I thought I was going to go to that school and do, and actually, so actually I can't go back. I thought I was going to do computer networking. And because that school allowed you to take courses towards a Cisco certification. And so that's what I had my sights on. Cause I'm like, oh, I can get Cisco certified and get a high school diploma. Like, yes, sign me up. But then I got lost in this programming track, not lost, but more like found. And I was like, oh, okay, no, I'm going to do the programming and just take a few networking courses. So I think they did a lot of things right because that internship that I had was through a partnership that they had through another third party company. But like, we all did like professional development after school for several weeks, and then we had to apply and interview and all of that, kind of like AOT. And so I think they did a lot of things right. I think they could have did it a little better at telling us about career paths in computer science. I think that's where they missed the mark because me and my best friend Kumar, we were like, he was like number one in the IT academy, I was number two. Like we were always neck and neck with grades and everything, and we both had the same epiphany at the same time, like, oh, well, I guess we're going to major in computer science. Like it was just fascinating that we had made it that far, all the way to AP computer science, and no one had talked to us about careers.
Mhm.
And so, and not even, it wasn't even like the department telling me about careers. It was my trio counselor helping me with that process. And so, and she was the one who was like, well, NC State's the best engineering school in North Carolina. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Because that's where she went to school. And so I think that's kind of where they missed the mark and they could have did a little bit better. And I think high schools, you know, as a high school student, you have a lot on your plate. You're just trying to juggle a lot. But the more exposure they can get to careers, the better. I remember going on some tours a few times in high school. That was helpful. But yeah, I think that career exploration is definitely key in addition to whatever they're doing in the classroom.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. I definitely resonate with those sentiments just based on my own life and the wishes that I wish that I had, the wishes or the things that I wish that I would have had when I was in high school, that I think would have made my journey into tech or just my journey into careers in general a little bit more clearer. And
Hmm.
so all right, so let's fast forward a little bit. So you're like, okay, I'm going into computer science, right?
Yes.
You ultimately graduate with your degree in computer science and you start working at Apple, which for many people, that is like the radicalist dream ever, right? To have this dream to go into tech and then ultimately end up at one of the largest tech companies in tech,
Yeah.
right? Tell us about your time at Apple. Did you feel it was your radicalist dream once you got there?
No, and I'll actually go back just a little. So I actually graduated and went to grad school. And it was in
Mhm.
grad school, I got a 1 year internship offer to go to Apple. So I always talk about Apple in two phases. I had a 1 year internship and then I worked full time. And I do that because I was on two different teams and had two totally different experiences. I think during the internship, I definitely was like, oh my God, like I'm out here at Apple. This is crazy, you know? But that never was a dream or an aspiration. I think I had Google on my radar a little bit because they were doing some education stuff. So my best friend I mentioned earlier, Kamar, he graduated from state and went to Google and was doing some more education, computer science education related initiatives. And I think that was more my interest at the time. But grad school was kind of pulling me. And so anyway, I'm at Apple and I'm like, wow. And then I'm like, they're teaching me how to be a designer and a researcher. Like, why on earth would I go back to grad school to pay to learn this same stuff? The math wasn't mathing, but I did get that degree. And so when I went back to Apple full time, I think by then I was a little more tainted in terms of like, I don't know, it doesn't take long for me to kind of like cut through any BS and just kind of like I can be in this fantasy world for a little bit, and then I'll go through some stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay. I see things for what they are, is what I'm trying to say. And so, I kind of knew Apple wasn't a good fit for me. For instance, they have like a zero tolerance policy on public speaking, and I could go into some details on experiences I had with them, but you mentioned I did a TED talk. That would have never flown had I worked at Apple, or I would have had to go through a lot of unwritten process to make a case for me to get on that stage to say, hey, I'm not even talking about Apple. This has nothing to do with Apple. You know what I'm saying? And so that was like a red flag for me in terms of like, this isn't aligning with my values and what I want to do in my life. And there were just a few other things too. I mean, Apple has, I don't know about now because they have that new campus, but back in the day, they had a bunch of different campuses across two cities, which meant that I was the only black woman in my building. So, like, what does that do for you? You know what I mean? Like, as a black woman, you go into this building every day and you're the only black woman. I met a lot of great black people who worked there, but they weren't, I didn't see them every day. And so there was just like a lot of things that I think I was dealing with at that time. And I was young too. So it was like, I'll just go leave and run my own business. So I think the internship phase definitely was like, wow. And then by the time I got back full time, I was kind of like, okay, this is gonna be cool until it's not. But I did learn a lot about my craft, like my actual profession, and then just from the people that I worked with.
Yeah. That also resonates a lot with me too, because I think for so much of my own undergraduate and graduate career, I had this vision that I would climb the corporate ladder. I got into my dream company and then I started working at my dream company only to find out that that was not my dream anymore. I
Exactly.
got there and I was just like, oh, this is what this is. Because when I was doing the internships with them, it wasn't an accurate reflection of the day to day. And And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, Jess, like, what are you gonna do? Because this is not
Yeah, 'cause this is
work,
not it.
is not it. And so the one thing I will say that I love about your story is that you realize, okay, like this is not it. And during that time is when we actually met and you were working on INTech, which
Mhm.
was something that you were really passionate about. And so at some point in your journey, you were like, no, ma'am. Right. And you decided to lead with servant leadership and leave Apple to take INTech full time. So this is pivot number one, y'all. For those of you who are following, this is pivot number one. Apple is not working. Now she's going to go do her own thing in her community with INTech. What was that mind process like? Because who in many ways, people will be like, leave a job at Apple to start a
Okay.
nonprofit. Why would you
My
do
first six-figure job.
that? Like, tell us what that was like.
This big six-figure job with this big Apple stock. Girl, what are you doing? Okay, so there was two things that kind of helped with this. So, well, actually three. I'll add you in 4.0 and like that discovery phase. But I think that started in 2016 when you and I had that conversation. But I didn't leave Apple until January 2018. So 2017, I ended up getting a coach. I got a coach because I was just really like, I'm not being fulfilled at work. I got to figure this out. Like, what, and so I had another friend who I met at Apple who left, and I talked to her about it. And she was like, I just took a bunch of sticky notes and wrote down every possible thing that I could do that I'm interested in or whatever. So I did that exercise. I put it on the back of my door, my apartment, and I just kind of left it there. And then my roommate at the time, so first was like the coach in that conversation with the friend, and then my roommate at the time also was kind of working on her business on the side while working in corporate too. And so in October of 2017, we did a 10-day spiritual fast. We had our little parameters about what we were gonna not do, which I failed at because I was traveling for Grace Hopper conference and my birthday. So whatever I wasn't supposed to eat, I was eating it. It was bad. But anyway, the prayer stuff, I got that though. And so um I went to Charlotte during this fast period and I had a couple meetings with folks just to understand what was happening in the computer science education space in Charlotte. I wanted to make sure if I came back to Charlotte, I'm doing something new and different and not reinventing the wheel or stepping on anybody's toes. And I kept telling people, um, I think I kept using the word pivot during that time period and telling people I wanted to pivot even in tech. And so anyway, I went to Grace Hopper. I was on a panel there with some Apple people. That's a whole other story. And I posted a photo of me and my panelists, and I was in the middle. And one of my high school mentors, who I had not talked to in years, she commented on it. I think either she commented or texted me, and she said, it reminded like me being in the middle reminded her of the word nucleus. And if you look up the word nucleus, like define the definition, um, there is was my word pivot. I don't know, but it was a synonym that was very similar to what I was telling people, right? But she had no idea. And it literally just, I lie to you not, I remember because I was in Charlotte and I drove to Raleigh because I was also getting an award, doing the most. And I had to call her because I almost like pulled over. Like, you don't even know what I've been saying and what I've been praying about, but your simple comment was like the sign for me. And so from then on, I started telling people, well, I'm quitting my job. And so, because my roommate and I did this together because our lease was up in January. And we were like, we're either going to renew and probably stay stuck and be comfortable here, or we're not going to renew and be forced out of our comfort zone. So I was forced back to North Carolina because I couldn't afford to stay in California without that Apple job. She stayed in the Bay a little bit longer than me before she moved to LA, and she stayed in corporate a little longer. But I put in my notice in December. So mind you, the conversation that I had was in October, and then I put my resignation in December, and I left in January of 2018. And so it was a bit of like me getting coaching, but then also me praying and getting a very clear sign. And I followed that sign, and I'm grateful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's funny that you operated with a sign, right? Because there are people that they'll just be like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do it. And you actually waited for the universe to say, oh, this is something that I have to do, right? And so I think oftentimes, especially when we are not happy with the situations that we're in, we want to make a pivot. Sometimes we throw out the baby with the bathwater, and
Right.
we're like, we're not thinking critically around like, what needs to be true in order for us to create the conditions around us to make sure that when we actually do these pivots that we are intentional about them. And so now circa, you have decided, all right, I'm leaving the job. You've left the job. Now you've officially relocated from the Bay Area to North Carolina to work on INTech, right? I
Mm-hmm.
remember, Khalia, a conversation I had with you when you were, because for people who are just listening and just learning about INTech was having a moment, right? Like
Yeah.
it was press, it was media, it was partnerships, it was sponsorships, there was a lot of stuff going on. And at the same time, I remember Khalia being like, ah, like I remember there were lots of
Absolutely.
there was like
Absolutely.
yeah, there were a lot of calls, and I was like, dang, she's really having a moment. And so now you left your job to do this. When were you like, all right, we locked in, we out there? Like as soon as you did it, or was it like a constant state of like, what is going on right?
I'll be honest. I was very insecure and lost for those first at least 3 months, if not 4. So the other thing that prompted me to go to North Carolina, I got accepted into, oh my goodness, there was a program in Charlotte. I think it's called Seed Charlotte. I can't believe I can't remember right now, but it was for nonprofit leaders, and only 10 of us could make it to the main stage to pitch for the grand prize. And I made it through that, and so I think that's when I kind of like felt better about what I was delivering from a product perspective, what we were doing in the community. But I was very insecure initially because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Um, so because I was trying to go beyond what we were already offering, right? And it's like I'm putting my 110% into this, and so a lot of things happened in 2018. So I did get to get on stage for that program. I didn't get the grand prize, but it was a phenomenal way for me to formalize my pitch and what we were doing. And then our mutual friend Sherelle Dorsey had wrote an article about me for her Columbia class that then got published in the Charlotte Observer that same summer. And I think that those two things kind of were like the shift, right? Where it was like the momentum just kind of went full speed ahead after that, where we started getting more press clips, but then also I found a better footing in what I was trying to do. And then that fall, we did a pilot high school program, which was kind of my vision anyway, and just was trying to make it work. And so I felt a lot more confident as the year went on. But at that initial state, oh no, it was that winter time was real dark and
Mhm.
cold and confusing. And just for folks to know, I didn't take a salary or any kind of money from InTech in that first year. I don't know when I started actually getting a stipend, never really a full time thing, but I'm living off of my savings. I'm living off of these little other jobs that I'm doing, teaching and doing this stuff. So I was literally hustling for rent and food in addition trying to build this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, trust me, I know that life very well. I didn't pay myself for the first like year and a half. Evan and I did not pay ourselves for the first year and a half because one, we didn't have the bread, we didn't have the money, and then two, it was just also like we didn't even know we could get paid, right?
That part too, right? It's like, oh, I can pay myself.
Yeah, there were lots of things with that. Like folks didn't tell us about that along the way, and I was just like, "Oh, okay." All right, so now things within tech obviously were dark and gloomy in the beginning stages. I think that is just the name of the game when you're an entrepreneur
Yeah.
and you're building something from scratch. But then ultimately, you start seeing bright spots along the way. You scaled the program, you raised $500,000, you are serving girls in the community that you're from and the community that you represent. And then there was a moment, right, where you were like, pivot number two. Right? You were like, pivot number two. And I was like, I had no idea this was coming. I was just like, she told no one. She didn't even obviously you told people, but I was like, oh wow, okay, pivot number two. What is my girl going to do? and ultimately you leave INTech to pursue your PhD full time. And so tell us, at what point were you like, my time at INTech is done, I'm gonna go and get a PhD? Because
So it was after,
oh, that's
after the PhD had started,
okay.
but
Yes.
the seed was planted before.
Okay.
So like you, I went on the reality Israel trip, and
Yes.
that was, well, actually that was the summer before I enrolled. So let me back up. Um, I graduated NC State wanting to get a PhD. I got denied from 3 programs. That's how I ended up in that master's. And when I got to the master's, I was like, I'm not going back to school. I'm going back to work. And so I just tabled it. And so, but I kept those relationships that I built in my master's, specifically with professors. And so one of those professors from my master's had now moved to Temple University in Philly. And I was in Philly for the Penn State's Wharton like executive education program. And so we caught up, and so we're talking. And by now I've taught some incoming freshmen at Johnson C. Smith. And, I've had some other computer science education experiences beyond InTech, and it got me thinking again, and it got her thinking, like, you know what, you need to get a PhD. And I'm like, oh girl, no. So this was like November 2018. But then she said, hey, you should come to this conference. It's for computer science education research. There you can find out who's doing what and maybe find a program. I said, all right, I found somebody to pay for that. And I went in March of 2019. And there was a professor I was chasing around the conference. I never really got to talk to her. But anyway, while I was there, someone actually offered me a spot in their lab. They're like, I have funding. You can come to my school. Now, mind you, this is March. So in my head, I'm not going to school in 2019 because I'm too late to apply, until this person is telling me, like, no, you can come in August if you want. Like, and so that changed my mindset. I was like, oh, I just, it's not too late and I can go for free. This is crazy. So the professor I mentioned, who's now at Temple, or was at Temple at the time. I caught up with her like a week after the conference, and I'm like, because now I'm like, whoa, I could go to school now. Like, that just blew my mind. And so I'm talking to her, getting her advice. At the end of the call, I said, well, do you have funding for me? Like, can you pay for, because in a STEM PhD specifically, like, it's generally free and you get a stipend, but it works like a professor has research dollars for you. And so I asked her if she had money for me, and she said, oh, I'll find some money. And so she did. A week later, I get an email like, pleased to offer you a space in my lab at Temple. And then I ended up getting like this fellowship that she pushed for me to get. And, the rest is history there. But then when I went to Israel, I had a lot of like tension with my place with InTech. I was burnt out and I really wanted to get out of the org, but I couldn't see a way out. And someone on that trip made it really plain for me. And they were just kind of like, you want to leave and you should. Like, this is no longer fulfilling you, it's no longer bringing you joy. And I hadn't had anyone like tell it to me like that. Like, obviously, like, truth tellers I need in my life, because I'll be like, oh, I like wake up. Because I also had someone tell me, oh, well, you started InTech, you can never get out of that. And I'm like, I can
Oh.
never get out of it. Let me show you. And so I was trying to find my way out. And so I had started the PhD. We went through COVID. We had did some pivots with InTech. We actually had a great year in 2020, despite all the things that were happening in the world. So I came into 2021 and I told my board, I said, hey, this is my last year. I'm gonna do all the things. I'm gonna raise the money, but y'all need to figure out my replacement. And so we were already working with a third party firm on some like strategic planning and stuff like that. And I said, hey, can you help us with this process? I talked to some other nonprofit founders who had rolled off of their nonprofits, and got some advice. And they were like, stay out of the process, and also don't stay on the board. Like, just be done with it if that's what you want to do. And that's what I did. And so in March of 2023, I rolled off, and in January 2023, the new executive director started, and I was a free bird. I was like, "Thank you, Lord." But I do want to mention that part of this was I wanted to get stress off of my body. I started to see how stress was impacting my body and my health, and so it was less about I don't want to do this anymore. It was more like I want to save myself, and so. Even with Apple, it was less about Apple and more about me wanting to go to InTech. So with each pivot is really deeply personal.
Yeah, you know what? And I want to stop there a little bit, right? Because, I do think that when we are transitioning our lives, right? And when we are pivoting our lives, like oftentimes people around us can really make it harder than what it is for us. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's already hard to make a pivot. And then hearing people, and their thoughts
Their
around
limiting beliefs.
their limiting beliefs, right, are kind of standing in the way or just like clouding things even more, right? And so, you pivoted from Apple to InTech, and now you're pivoting from InTech to, going full time into a PhD program. And for folks that were observing from the outside that didn't know the things going on with your body and stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
They would be like, oh, this girl's always leaving when it's up, right? Like, Apple, you up.
That's a great way to put it.
Right?
She leaving when it's up.
Yeah. Or like Intech, $500,000. Like, she leaving when it's up. But I don't think people realize, like, people are not just leaving things when it's up. People are leaving things when, like, the divine order of the universe is no longer calling them to those things, right? And so,
Yes.
what were the things during this time, of both times, that you did to make sure you grounded yourself and feeling good about these decisions and cutting the noise around you out?
Um, that's a good question. I'm trying to think back to that first pivot because I remember going through the process of moving out of my apartment, and there was a day where I felt lighter, and I realized that I was depressed for probably most of December. And so I think in each of those pivots, there's like this dark time where I'm probably doubting myself and just unsure, but just pushing along because I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so it's really not easy. And it's definitely not easy to leave when it's up because Intech was up when I left for real, for real. And yeah, so yeah, so I think, yeah, I grew up, my grandmother is very spiritual. I grew up very spiritual. And so, I've always just kind of looked for, God or like this voice, and also learned about myself that like I have to feel good, literally, like my body. I feel things in my body, and that's when I know if it's right or wrong. And
Mhm.
I'm the older I get, the more I'm better at listening to that because I have not been good at that historically. I'd be like, I'm a scientist. I need to know why I feel this way, And then I went to therapy and I was like, no, Clea, you don't always know why. And I'm like, I guess. So the feeling in my body of like me being able to say, I'm going to resign from Intech, like that felt good.
Mhm.
It doesn't may not feel good to other people, but it felt good to me. And as someone who grew up the only child, I'm blessed in that like I don't need the opinions of others. I just do what I want to do. Um, and I just think about the brighter side on the other side, and and stay grounded in my why. And I think that's what's helped in each time. But like you said, especially people who've not done these things, right? It's really hard sometimes to find folks that identify with these pivots and leaps and whatever you want to call them. And so then it's sometimes you feel like you're the only one, and then it's like, well, just gotta do it show everybody else that it's possible.
For sure. Yeah, I was actually talking to one of my homies the other day, and he asked me, like, just like, how do you know something is not right for you? And I said the same thing. I was just like, it's somatic. Like, if I don't feel well in my body about it, then like it's a
That's it.
no. And then
Yeah.
also the second thing, if it's not an automatic yes, like if I have to actually think about it, it's actually a no. Because I'm a
And
pretty
I gotta get better at
like
that.
I'm a pretty decisive person. So to be at a place where I'm just like not giving an automatic yes, that means that it
No,
absolutely needs to be a no, because there's gonna be a point where I'm looking back and I'm like,
why did I do that?
why'd I do that? Right? Like I
It's
have
funny you say that because I'm indecisive. And so for me
mm,
to come to these decisions, like once I'm there, I'm there. Because I've
yeah.
asked all the people, I've read all the things, I've tried, like I have done the due diligence. And so once I'm there because I don't want to think about it no more.
Yeah, no, I feel you. All right, so then let's talk about pivot number three. So you get your PhD, right? You get
I
the
know your
PhD.
listeners are like, dang, she got another pivot. That's crazy.
No, but you know, but all these pivots are also just so beautiful, right? Because you get to reinvent yourself over and over again, and you're
Yeah.
doing it, in consideration of like your well-being, right? Rather than staying
Hmm.
stuck in places that you don't feel called to. And so, pivot number 3 comes in that you become Dr. Khalia Braswell. She graduates
Hey,
from the PhD.
hey.
Usually, people will go into academia. And then Kalia was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be a doctor at a
That's a
university.
no for me.
It's a no. And ultimately, you end up back in industry. So
Yeah.
tell us why you did that. Because most people will be like, oh my God, there are not a lot of Black professors. There are not a
I
lot of
know.
professors that are Black within this field too, like within computer science. Like,
Yeah.
what were the conditions around you that you were like, nah, this is not something I can do?
I'm gonna start by saying I love teaching and I love mentoring students.
Mm-hmm.
However, comma, I've only gone to research one institutions. Well, my master's wasn't, but it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And so all I know is professors writing National Science Foundation grants, getting that money or not, doing their studies, but then also they have a lab of students, whether they're undergrad, grad, PhD level. And, it felt like the same hustle as the nonprofit. And my advisor was a department chair also. And so I saw how she was overextended. And 2020 in 2020 to 2022, maybe 2023, was when I was deep in my I don't want to be stressed. How can I de-stress myself bag, right? I'm doing yoga, I'm meditating, I'm in therapy. Like I did some really deep healing in Philly, even though I hated that city. And so I'm looking at her be stressed and pulled on all these places. And I'm thinking about this nonprofit grind that I'm trying to get out of. And I'm looking at the similarities in the academy. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that because you're telling me you spent months writing this National Science Foundation grant and you didn't get it when I've learned how to do a 30-minute, maybe even 15-minute pitch to a company and walk away with 20K with no, that's all I had to do was show up and talk about INTech. I was like, the math wasn't mathing for me. So, and I got to teach and do serve. Like, it was just too much. And so I'm grateful that I got the PhD. I'm grateful that I went through that process. I've seen ways where I've been able to leverage some of what I've learned. I'm still very much in this in the community, like the computer science education community, and just figuring out what that looks like. But ultimately, I decided I didn't want to do that. I want to go back into the tech industry because think about it. I was at Apple for like 2.5 years. I left very early in my career. And so for me, it was like, well, let me go back and get what's mine, and you make a lot of money in industry. Now it comes with some caveats because I was at a startup and then I got laid off. So, going back to industry is a gift and a curse, but I just needed stability for a little bit. I needed somebody else to think about money at the end of the day. I wanted to be able to just do my work, close my laptop, and live my life in Atlanta. And that is what I'm doing. And I'm very grateful and happy and not stressed.
Good. And I honestly love that for you because, from the outside looking in, I think that you have really modeled what it looks like for people to choose themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like in a world where women of color, we're often choosing everybody else, we're centering everyone else.
Yeah.
Like it is really beautiful to see and to witness a woman of color say, like, actually, I'm gonna do what's best for me. And I think
Period.
you did that. You've done that over and over and over again. So for our listeners, right here at Behind the Work, who are kind of like, I've got to figure out like what does it look like to choose myself because I need to pivot from what I'm currently doing. Like, what are the tips and tricks and strategies that you would impart on them today as they are listening to this episode?
The first thing I always offer up, it was written for Black women specifically, but not exclusively. Bell Hooks' Sisters of the Yam is the book that changed this all for me because she talked about how Black women were carrying so much stress, not only just from their day to day, but all the isms, the racisms, the capitalisms, and things of that sort. And I literally was like journaling as I was reading this book and taking that to therapy and like working through my limiting beliefs and things of that sort. And it's funny how you say I choose myself. I grew up a people pleaser for other reasons. And so that was the game changer for me. And so I think doing that kind of work to understand what is your why and what is the root cause of all the things for me, it was I was overperforming because I couldn't control the fact that I lived in a single parent home. I couldn't
Mm,
control the fact that my parents were divorced, but I can control my success. I can get these great grades and these leadership positions. Um, Elaine Welterworth has a book called More Than Enough. That was another book that I read, and she had that unlocked. That's kind of what helped me figure out, like, oh, that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm chasing success because I can control it. I can't control my life, but now I'm a 30 something. I can 1000% control my life. And so I just had to kind of unpack the root cause of why I was doing those things and realize, like, oh, well, I've already arrived. I've done all the things. Now I don't need to do them no more. And so I can gift myself rest, or the ability to say no. So doing that inner work is important, and you really can't avoid it to get on the other side of wherever, because it's always going to come up.
absolutely. And Kalia, the other thing I want to ask you is, when you think about what it looks like to build a tribe of people that are going to be
Mm.
supportive of you during times of pivoting, what would you say were the boundaries that you put up with people that allowed you to find the right people that needed to be there at the right time during these times?
That is a great question. I feel like I'm still figuring that out. Um, as someone who's been in the spotlight in some sense since high school, I've had to get really good at realizing who is for me and who is just wants to be associated with me. And so I think that's been helpful. One of my philosophies on friendships, which might sound cutthroat, because I have some really good friendships, right? But it's like people are in your life for seasons and everything that happens for a reason. It's a Kanye West lyric, but like that's my philosophy. So I don't get hurt when I'm no longer close to somebody. Our season is up, and that's okay.
Mhm.
And so, I've had to get really good at sussing out who is really for me. And one way that I was able to do that is I've had some friendships where I'm like, I'm having some really cool stuff happening, and I'm sharing it with them first, and then their reaction is like, oh, okay, and they might change the subject, and I'm like, oh no,
Oh
because if
no.
you can't be excited for me when I'm excited, you
Oh.
gotta go. And so I've had a lot of that happen. And then, like I told you, I'm still really good friends with my high school mentors. And that means a lot because they've known me since I was little Khalia. You know what I'm saying? Walking around Philippo Berry like I ran the place. So they can keep me humble as well. So, it's really important to try to like hone in on that. And you mentioned boundaries. I had very weak boundaries for a very long time. And I just kind of read some books about that and kind of reframe what that looks like. It's like if I need to have a crucial conversation with you about something and set a boundary, is not about a conflict. It's just about me showing you how to treat me. And then if you don't want to meet that boundary, then you got to go then too. So it was a lot of work. Let me tell y'all, I did a lot of healing in Philly. Beyond getting that PhD, I did a lot of healing. And so yeah, again, the deep work, you just gotta kind of do it.
Yeah. I would very much say that your time in Philly very much sounds like my time in LA. And while
Mm,
while career wise, I didn't make any pivots because I'm still doing what I'm doing professionally. I
yeah.
definitely saw a lot of pivots in the ways in which there were certain things about my lifestyle that I changed a lot.
Mm,
When you were in the process of like unlearning and undoing
mm,
what folks are used to seeing about you, right? That can be really uncomfortable for people, right?
yeah.
And so I really feel you on like, being able to like having to use your discernment a lot of times to figure out who do you want around you during these times, And so thanks so
Yeah.
much for sharing. And so
Absolutely.
my
Hmm.
last question for you as we wrap this up is, what would you say is gonna be your next pivot? Or what are you
Y'all, I'm tired
anticipate?
of pivoting. I just want to be great at my job. You know what though? No, for real. I'm either going to do one or both of these things, and this could be much later. I'm gonna figure out a way to get into sports because I love it. I love engaging other people. Like people are engaged with women's basketball because of me.
Mhm.
And I don't walk around saying that, but like it's exciting because it's like, oh great, more people I can talk to about basketball. Um, and I'm really into like the sports analyst and like the folks who are breaking down the game. Like that's the part that I like the most. So that might be years away because right now it's just a hobby and I appreciate it being a hobby. And I really want to write a romance novel, but I don't know when that's going to come either. So look out for those pivots later on in Khalia's journey in life.
That is so fun. I'm so excited for your romance novel. Actually, I always said I wanted to be a little bit of a Jessica Nicholas Sparks myself.
Yes, let's
Yes.
do it.
We will do it together at some point. Well, Khalia, thanks so much for dropping by the show today. We really
Absolutely.
appreciate it. For those who want to keep in touch with you, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram as Dr. Khalia Braswell, LinkedIn, and then I have a website that I need to update, KhaliaBraswell.com. But that's generally where you can find me online.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Work. Make sure that you leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Mwah.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Behind the Work. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Follow us on YouTube and on social media. I want to hear how this show is leaving an impact on you.